Married to the Mafia Boss, she hid secrets under her pillow until one fell and revealed who she was. That single sentence would come to define everything Elena Vasquez thought she knew about her own life. But on the night the photograph slipped from beneath the silk pillowcase and landed at the feet of Dominic Moretti, the most powerful man in Chicago's underworld, she understood that some truths cannot stay buried forever. This is the story of how one woman's hidden past collided with a dangerous present, and how love became the only force strong enough to survive the fallout. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight over the streets of Chicago, turning the city into a grey watercolor of headlights and umbrellas. Elena stood at the window of the penthouse on Michigan Avenue, her fingers pressed against the cold glass, watching the droplets race each other down the surface. Behind her, the apartment stretched out in all its marble-floored luxury, a palace of cream-colored furniture and original artwork that still felt foreign to her even after 18 months of marriage. She could hear Dominic in his office down the hall, his voice low and measured as he spoke on the phone in rapid Italian. Even after all this time, she had not learned to understand more than fragments of that language, though she had memorized the tone that meant business was going badly and the one that meant someone had disappointed him. Tonight, it was the latter. Elena turned from the window and caught her reflection in the glass. 29 years old, dark hair that fell past her shoulders, eyes the color of autumn leaves. She looked exactly like what she was supposed to be, the wife of Dominic Moretti, the woman who had appeared in his life 2 years ago at a charity gala in Manhattan and somehow managed to capture his attention. What no one knew, what no one could ever know, was that nothing about that meeting had been coincidence. She walked to the bedroom, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floors. The room was dimly lit by a single lamp on the nightstand, casting warm shadows across the king-sized bed with its Italian linens. Elena sat on the edge of the mattress and lifted the pillow on her side, her hand sliding beneath it to touch the familiar shape of the envelope she had hidden there for months. Inside that envelope were 3 photographs and a letter. Inside that envelope was the truth about who she really was and why she had walked into Dominic Moretti's life. Every night she checked to make sure it was still there, still safe, still secret, and every night she told herself that tomorrow would be the day she finally destroyed it. But she never did. The door opened and Elena's hand jerked away from the pillow as if she had been touching something hot. Dominic stood in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space, his dark suit still perfectly pressed despite the late hour. He was 42 years old, with the kind of face that belonged on Roman coins. Strong jaw, straight nose, eyes so dark they appeared black in certain lights. Those eyes were watching her now with an expression she could not quite read. "You should be asleep," he said, his voice carrying the faint accent that always grew stronger when he was tired. "I was waiting for you." He crossed the room and stopped beside the bed, looking down at her. The meeting ran long, problems with a shipment. Elena nodded, though she knew better than to ask for details. In 18 months of marriage, she had learned the boundaries of Dominic's world. There were rooms she did not enter, conversations she did not overhear, questions she did not ask. In return, he gave her everything else: protection, comfort, a life of privilege that she had never known growing up in the small apartment in Queens where her mother had raised her alone. "Come to bed," she said softly. Dominic loosened his tie with one hand, his eyes still on her face. "You look troubled." "Just the rain. It makes me melancholy." He sat beside her on the bed, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and woodsy that she had come to associate with safety. His hand lifted to her face, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "You are a terrible liar, Elena. It is one of the things I love about you." Her heart stuttered in her chest. Love. He said that word so rarely, as if it were a currency he could not afford to spend freely, and every time he said it, she felt the weight of her deception pressing down on her like a physical force. "I'm not lying," she said. "I'm just tired." "Then sleep." He leaned forward and pressed a kiss to her forehead, his lips warm against her skin. "I have some calls to make. I will join you soon." She watched him walk back toward the door, his shoulders straight, his movements controlled and deliberate. Everything about Dominic Moretti was controlled and deliberate. He had built an empire on discipline and precision, on the ability to see 3 moves ahead in every game, and Elena had spent 18 months trying to stay 1 step ahead of him. When the door closed behind him, she reached beneath the pillow again. Her fingers found the envelope, and she pulled it out, holding it in her hands. Inside were the photographs of her mother, of herself as a child, of a man she had been told was her father. Inside was the letter from Agent Morrison at the FBI, explaining what they needed from her and what they would give her in return. Elena had been 27 when they approached her. She had been working as a paralegal at a law firm in Manhattan, living in a studio apartment the size of Dominic's closet, sending money home to her mother every month. The agents had shown up at her office one afternoon with a proposition that sounded like something from a movie. They knew who her father was. They had proof. And they wanted her to use that connection to get close to Dominic Moretti, to gather evidence, to help them bring down the organization he had spent 20 years building. In exchange, they would protect her mother, pay off her student loans, and give her a new life when it was over. All she had to do was become someone else for a while. All she had to do was make a powerful man fall in love with her. What they had not told her, what she had not anticipated, was the possibility that she might fall in love with him too. Elena slid the envelope back beneath the pillow and lay down, staring at the ceiling. The rain continued to fall outside, drumming against the windows like 1,000 tiny fingers asking to be let in. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but her mind kept circling back to the same questions that haunted her every night. How much longer could she keep this up? How much longer before Dominic discovered who she really was? And when that day came, would he understand why she had done it, or would he simply add her name to the list of people who had betrayed him? She was still awake when Dominic finally came to bed 3 hours later. She felt the mattress shift under his weight, felt his arm wrap around her waist and pull her close. He pressed his face into her hair and murmured something in Italian that she did not understand, and she pretended to be asleep because it was easier than looking into his eyes. The next morning, Eleanor woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of rain still falling. Dominic was already gone, his side of the bed cold, the pillow still bearing the impression of his head. She reached beneath her own pillow automatically, checking for the envelope, and felt her blood turn to ice. It was not there. Eleanor sat up, throwing back the covers, her hands searching frantically across the mattress. She lifted the pillow, shook it, looked beneath the sheets. Nothing. The envelope was gone. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She tried to think, tried to remember the night before. Had she put it back? She was sure she had. She always put it back. Unless somehow in her exhaustion she had forgotten, unless it had slipped out during the night and fallen onto the floor. Elena dropped to her knees beside the bed, looking under the frame. Dust bunnies and shadows, but no envelope. She crawled around to Dominic's side, checking every inch of carpet, every corner of the room. Still nothing. And then she saw it. The envelope was lying on Dominic's nightstand, propped against the lamp, where she could not possibly miss it. It had been opened, the flap lifted, the photographs clearly visible inside. Elena could not move. She could not breathe. She stared at that envelope and understood that her entire life had just collapsed around her. He knew. Dominic knew everything. She heard footsteps in the hallway, and then the bedroom door opened. Dominic stood there in his usual dark suit, his face completely expressionless. He looked at her kneeling on the floor beside the bed, and something flickered in. His eyes that might have been disappointment or might have been something worse. "We need to talk," he said. Elena rose slowly, her legs unsteady beneath her. She tried to find words, tried to formulate some explanation, but nothing came. There was nothing she could say that would make this better. There was no lie clever enough to undo what he had already seen. Dominic walked to the nightstand and picked up the envelope. He pulled out the photographs one by one, studying each one with the same careful attention he gave to business documents. "Agent Morrison," he said. "FBI. How long have you been working with him? Elena's voice came out as a whisper. 2 years. Before we met? Yes. He nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. The charity gala. You engineered that meeting. They told me where you would be. They gave me a dress, a cover story, everything. And I fell for it. There was no anger in his voice, only a cold, analytical calm that was somehow more frightening. I watched you walk across that room and thought you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I thought it was fate. Elena felt tears burning in her eyes. Dominic, please let me explain. Explain what? That you married me so you could send me to prison? That every moment we shared was a performance? That you have been gathering evidence against me for 18 months while sleeping in my bed? It started that way, but it changed. I changed. He laughed. Short, bitter sound that cut through the air like a blade. That is convenient. It is the truth. She stepped toward him, desperate to make him understand. I know you have no reason to believe me. I know I destroyed any trust between us, but what I feel for you is real. It became real somewhere along the way, and I did not know what to do. Dominic set the photographs down on the nightstand. His jaw was tight, the muscles in his neck corded with tension he was barely controlling. My men intercepted a message from Morrison last week. He was asking one of his contacts about a woman named Elena Vasquez, who had gone dark 18 months ago. At first, I thought it was someone else. I could not imagine that my wife, the woman I trusted with my life, was the person they were looking for. I stopped giving them information, Elena said. 8 months ago, I stopped. I could not do it anymore. Why? Because I fell in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, fragile, and terrible and true. Elena watched Dominic's face, searching for any sign that he might believe her, that some part of him might still see her as something other than an enemy. But his expression did not change. Love, he repeated. You use that word as if it means something coming from your mouth. It means everything. That is why I could not go through with it. That is why I have been hiding these photographs instead of handing them over. I was trying to find a way out, a way to protect, both of us. There is no way out of betrayal, Elena. You should know that. He turned and walked toward the door, and Elena felt panic rising in her chest. If he left now, if he walked out of this room with that cold look in his eyes, she knew she would never see him again. Or worse, she would see him one last time in circumstances she did not want to imagine. Wait, she called out. Please wait. Dominic stopped with his hand on the door handle. He did not turn around. I have been loyal to you for 8 months, Elena said. I know that does not erase what came before. I know I have no right to ask for anything. But there are things you do not know, things about my past that explain why I agreed to this in the first place. Nothing explains what you did. My father explains it. Now Dominic did turn. His eyes narrowed, the first crack in his controlled facade. Your father. Elena walked to the nightstand and picked up one of the photographs. It showed a man in his 50s, grey-haired, distinguished, wearing the uniform of a police captain. This is my father, Captain Richard Vasquez of the NYPD. He was killed 15 years ago during a raid on a warehouse in Brooklyn. The official report said it was a random shooting, but the FBI believes he was executed because he was about to testify against a crime family he had been investigating. Dominic took the photograph from her hand, studying the man's face. I do not recognize him. You would not. He was investigating your father's organization, not yours. He never got the chance to build a case against Giovanni Moretti. Someone tipped off the family, and my father paid the price. Elena watched the information settle into Dominic's mind. She could see him processing it, connecting the dots, understanding why the FBI would approach her specifically. They told you I was responsible for your father's death. They told me that the Moretti family ordered the hit. They said that if I helped them bring down the organization, I would be getting justice for my father. And you believed them. I wanted to believe them. I was angry and grieving and desperate for someone to blame. It was easier to see you as a monster than as a person. Dominic set the photograph down. His expression had shifted, something complicated moving behind his eyes that Elena could not quite identify. "My father ordered many things during his reign," he said slowly. "I was 17 years old when your father died. I did not know about his operations, and I certainly did not know about any hits on police officers, but that does not mean it did not happen. I know. I have spent the last 18 months learning who you really are. You are not your father, Dominic. You have done things I cannot condone, but you are not the man who killed mine. How can you be so certain? Because I know you now. I have seen the way you treat your people, the loyalty you inspire, the lines you refuse to cross. You are many things, but you are not a murderer of innocent men." Dominic was silent for a long moment. The rain continued to fall outside, filling the room with its soft percussion. Eleanor stood before him with her heart exposed, waiting for him to decide her fate. Finally, he spoke. "Agent Morrison will come looking for you when you do not check in. He will assume either that you have been compromised or that you have switched sides. I know. He will send people. He will try to bring you in. I know. That too. And what do you expect me to do about it?" Elena met his eyes, holding nothing back. "I expect you to do whatever you think is right. If that means turning me out, I understand. If that means something worse, I understand that too. But I am not going to run, and I am not going to lie to you anymore. Whatever happens next, you deserve to make that choice with the truth in front of you." Dominic studied her face for what felt like an eternity. She could see him weighing her words against her actions, trying to determine whether anything she said could be trusted. And she could see something else beneath the suspicion, something that looked almost like pain. "You are either the bravest woman I have ever met," he said finally, "or the most foolish. Maybe both." The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers wrapping around hers with a gentleness that surprised her. "I need time to think," he said. "I need to verify some of what you have told me. Until then, you will stay in this apartment. You will not contact anyone, not Morrison, not your mother, not anyone from your old life. Do you understand?" Elena nodded. "Yes. If I find out you have lied to me about anything else, there will be no second conversation. I understand." He released her hand and turned toward the door again. But before he left, he paused and looked back at her over his shoulder. "For what it is worth," he said, "I fell in love with you too. That is what makes this so difficult." Then he was gone, and Eleanor was left standing alone in the bedroom with the sound of rain and the wreckage of her secrets scattered around her. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel. If stories about love, redemption, and impossible choices speak to your heart, then this is where you belong. Subscribe now so you never miss what happens next. The next 3 days were the longest of Elena's life. She stayed in the penthouse as Dominic had instructed, moving from room to room like a ghost, eating meals that tasted like cardboard, sleeping in fits and starts that left her more exhausted than before. Dominic came and went at odd hours, sometimes staying for an hour or two in his office, sometimes disappearing for an entire day. He spoke to her only when necessary, his tone polite but distant, as if she were a house guest rather than his wife. On the 4th day, he summoned her to his office. Eleanor walked down the hallway, with her heart in her throat. The office door was open, and she could see Dominic sitting behind his massive mahogany desk, a stack of papers spread out before him. The room smelled of old leather and expensive scotch, and the walls were lined with books that he actually read, not just displayed. "Sit down," he said without looking up. She took the chair across from him and waited. He continued reviewing the papers for another minute, making notes in the margins with a fountain pen. Finally, he set the pen down and looked at her. "I have had my people investigate your story," he said. "Your father was indeed Captain Richard Vasquez. He was indeed killed during a raid 15 years ago. And there is evidence, circumstantial but compelling, that someone within my father's organization leaked information that led to his death." Elena felt her stomach drop. So they were right. They were partially right. The leak came from someone in the organization, but it was not my father who ordered. It was his underboss at the time, a man named Carlo Benedetti. He was running a side operation that your father had stumbled onto, and he acted to protect himself without my father's knowledge or consent. What happened to him? Benedetti? My father had him killed when he found out. He considered it a betrayal of trust, acting without authorization on something that could have brought law enforcement down on the entire family. Benedetti's death was ruled a heart attack. Elena processed this information slowly. All these years she had blamed the Moretti family for her father's death. She had built her entire mission around that blame, and now she was learning that the truth was more complicated than she had ever imagined. Why did the FBI tell me it was your father? Because they did not know the full story, or because they did know and decided it would be more useful to let you believe a simpler version. The FBI is not above manipulation when it serves their interests. But you are telling me the truth now. Dominic leaned back in his chair, his dark eyes fixed on her face. I have no reason to lie to you anymore, Elena. You already know enough to destroy me if you choose to. What would one more secret matter? Then why are you telling me this? Because you asked for the truth, and because I have spent the last 4 days trying to decide whether any part of what we had was real. He paused, and for a moment the controlled mask slipped, revealing something vulnerable beneath. I have concluded that it does not matter what was real at the beginning. What matters is what is real now. Elena felt tears threatening to spill over. And what is real now? That you could have turned me in months ago and did not. That you stopped feeding information to Morrison at considerable risk to yourself. That you stood in this apartment and told me the truth when you could have run. I could not run from you, Dominic. I tried to convince myself to leave 100 times and I never could, because somewhere along the way this stopped being a mission and started being my life. He nodded slowly. Then we have a decision to make, both of us. What decision? Dominic stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. The rain had finally stopped and pale sunlight was breaking through the clouds, casting long shadows across the office floor. Morrison will not stop looking for you. Eventually he will figure out that you have been turned and he will come after you with everything he has. That means we have 2 options. Elena waited, hardly daring to breathe. Option 1, we go to war. I use my resources to protect you, and we spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders, waiting for the next attack. It would be dangerous, exhausting, and possibly fatal for both of us. And option 2, Dominic turned to face her. Option 2, we give Morrison what he wants. Eleanor blinked. I do not understand. Not everything of course, not enough to destroy the organization, but enough to satisfy his superiors, enough to make them think they have won something. A few names, a few operations that we were planning to shut down anyway. In exchange, he agrees to leave you alone, and we get a chance to start over. You would do that? You would sacrifice part of your empire to protect me? I would sacrifice more than that. He walked back to the desk and sat on the edge, close enough that she could have touched him if she reached out. Do you know what I realized over the last 4 days, Elena? I realized that everything I have built means nothing if I do not have someone to share it with. I have spent 20 years accumulating power, and I have never once stopped to ask myself what I was accumulating it for. What are you saying? I am saying that I choose you, despite the lies, despite the betrayal, despite every reason I have to walk away. I choose to believe that what we have is worth fighting for. Eleanor stood up, her legs trembling beneath her. She reached out and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. I choose you too, she whispered. I think I chose you a long time ago, even before I understood what that meant. Dominic pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. She could feel his heart beating, steady and strong, and for the first time in days she felt like she could breathe again. Then we will do this together, he said. Whatever comes next, we face it as partners. They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other's arms, the silence of the office surrounding them like a cocoon. And Elena allowed herself to believe, for the first time since this all began, that maybe she had not destroyed everything. Maybe there was still a chance to build something real from the ashes of her deception. The next week was a whirlwind of activity. Dominic arranged a meeting with Agent Morrison through intermediaries, making it clear that any attempt to arrest either of them would result in the release of certain documents that Morrison would prefer to keep buried. The agent agreed to talk, and they met at a neutral location, a restaurant in the suburbs that Dominic's people had swept for surveillance. Elena sat beside Dominic at a corner table, watching Morrison approach. The agent looked older than she remembered, his hair grayer, the lines around his eyes deeper. He sat across from them without shaking hands, his expression guarded. "Mrs. Moretti," he said. "Or should I call you Agent Vasquez?" "Elena is fine. You have put me in a difficult position, Elena. 18 months of work, and you went dark without explanation. My superiors are not happy." "Your superiors will be very happy with what I am about to offer them," Dominic said. "Information on 3 ongoing operations that will lead to multiple arrests and the seizure of several $1 million in assets, all in exchange for one thing." Morrison's eyes narrowed. "Which is?" "Elena's complete freedom. No surveillance, no harassment, no attempts to bring her in for questioning. She walks away clean, and your agency gets credit for a major bust." The agent was silent for a moment, considering the offer. Elena could see him calculating the angles, weighing the benefits against the costs. "And if I refuse?" "Then you get nothing. And I release certain documents that detail your agency's use of undercover operatives in ways that violate several federal statutes. I am sure the press would find it fascinating reading." Morrison's jaw tightened. "That is blackmail. That is negotiation. The choice is yours." The agent looked at Elena, something like disappointment in his eyes. "You know, I recruited you because I believed you wanted justice for your father. I thought we were on the same side." "We were never on the same side," Elena said quietly. "You were using me, and I was using you. The difference is that I finally stopped." Morrison was silent for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a pen. "Where do I sign?" The deal was struck that afternoon. Dominic provided the promised information, and Morrison agreed to close Eleanor's file permanently. There would be no more surveillance, no more contact, no more obligations. She was free. Walking out of that restaurant, Elena felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she had been carrying for 2 years. The sun was setting over the Chicago skyline, painting the clouds in shades of orange and pink, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt like she could finally look forward instead of back. "It is done," Dominic said, his hand warm in hers. "It is done," she agreed. "So what happens now?" He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and softened the hard lines of his face. "Now we go home, and we figure out what kind of life we want to build together." They walked to the car, their fingers intertwined, and Elena realized that this was what it felt like to be given a second chance. Not just a chance to escape her past, but a chance to create a future that she had never dared to imagine. The drive back to the penthouse was quiet, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that comes from 2 people who no longer have anything to hide. Dominic kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other on her knee, his thumb tracing small circles against her skin. When they arrived home, Eleanor walked to the window and looked out at the city, the same view she had stared at so many times before. But everything looked different now. The buildings seemed brighter, the streets less threatening, the world full of possibilities instead of dangers. Dominic came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I am thinking that I do not deserve this. After everything I did, I do not deserve for it to turn out this way." "Perhaps not. But I learned a long time ago that life does not give us what we deserve. It gives us what we are brave enough to take." Elena turned in his arms and looked up at his face. "I love you, Dominic. I know I said it before, and I know you had no reason to believe me then. But I need you to believe me now. I love you." He leaned down and kissed her, soft and slow, and she felt something click into place inside her heart, something that had been broken for a very long time. "I believe you," he said, against her lips. "And I love you too, more than I have ever loved anything." They stood together at the window, holding each other as the city lights flickered on one by one below them. And Elena understood that this was not an ending, but a beginning. The first chapter of a new story, written by two people who had found each other against all odds. The weeks that followed were a revelation. Without the weight of her secret pressing down on her, Elena discovered a freedom she had never known. She laughed more easily, slept more soundly, and found herself falling in love with Dominic all over again, this time without the shadow of guilt darkening every moment. They began to build a life together in earnest. Dominic started the process of transitioning some of his business operations into legitimate ventures, a change he said had been a long time coming. He brought Elena into his confidence, sharing aspects of his world that he had kept hidden before, trusting her with information that could still destroy him if she chose to use it. But she did not choose that. She chose him every day with every breath. One afternoon, about 6 weeks after the meeting with Morrison, Eleanor came home from a shopping trip to find the penthouse filled with flowers. Roses, lilies, orchids, and dozens of varieties she could not name, arranged in vases throughout every room. The scent was overwhelming, intoxicating, like walking into a garden in the middle of the city. "Dominic," she called out. He appeared in the doorway of the living room, dressed more casually than she had ever seen him, in jeans and a simple white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked younger somehow, more relaxed, like a different version of the man she had married. "Do you like them?" he asked. "They are beautiful, but what is the occasion? Does there need to be an occasion?" Eleanor walked through the flowers, touching petals here and there, marveling at the colors and textures. When she reached him, she stood, on her toes, and kissed his cheek. "No occasion necessary, but I know you, Dominic Moretti. You do nothing without a reason." He smiled and took her hand. "Come with me." He led her through the apartment to the terrace, where a table had been set with champagne and candles. The sun was beginning to set, casting golden light across the Chicago skyline, and the air was warm with the promise of summer. "Sit," he said, pulling out her chair. Elena sat, watching him with curious eyes as he poured 2 glasses of champagne and handed one to her. "18 months ago," he began, "a woman walked into a charity gala and changed my life. At the time, I thought I knew who she was. I thought I understood what she wanted. I was wrong about almost everything." Elena felt her throat tighten. "Dominic, let me finish." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I was wrong about who you were when we met. But I was not wrong about what I felt. From the moment I saw you, I knew that you were different from anyone I had ever known. I knew that if I could make you mine, I would be the luckiest man alive. You did make me yours. I thought I did. But I realized recently that I never gave you the chance to truly choose. You married me under false pretenses, with a mission hanging over your head. You never had the opportunity to decide freely whether this was what you wanted." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Elena's breath caught in her chest. "I am asking you now, Elena. No secrets, no missions, no obligations, just you and me and the truth." He opened the box, revealing a ring with a single diamond that caught the light and scattered it into rainbows. "Will you marry me again? Will you choose me, knowing everything you know?" Tears were streaming down Elena's face, but she did not bother to wipe them away. She looked at the ring, at his face, at the life they had built from the ruins of her deception. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you. Today, tomorrow, every day for the rest of my life." Dominic slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her hand and no other. He pulled her to her feet and kissed her, and Elena felt the last remnants of her guilt dissolve in the warmth of his embrace. They were married again 3 weeks later, in a small ceremony at a vineyard in Napa Valley. Only a handful of people attended. Dominic's most trusted associates, Eleanor's mother, who had flown in from New York with tears in her eyes, and a priest who asked no questions about the nature of the groom's business. Elena wore a simple white dress, and Dominic wore a suit the color of midnight. They exchanged vows beneath a canopy of grapevines, the California sun warm on their faces, the scent of wine and flowers filling the air. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Dominic lifted Elena's veil and looked at her with an expression that made her heart stop. "Forever," he said. "Forever," she agreed. The reception was small but perfect, with food and music and laughter that lasted long into the night. Elena danced with her mother, who held her tight and whispered that she had never seen her daughter so happy. She danced with Dominic, who held her close and promised that he would spend the rest of his life proving that her faith in him was not misplaced. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the candles had burned low, Elena and Dominic sat together on the terrace of the vineyard cottage, looking up at the stars. "I used to dream about a life like this," Elena said. "When I was young, before everything got complicated, I used to imagine falling in love and getting married and being happy. Then life happened, and I forgot how to dream. And now? Now I am living the dream I forgot. It feels surreal, like at any moment I might wake up and find out it was all a fantasy." Dominic pulled her closer, his arm warm around her shoulders. "It is not a fantasy. It is real. We made it real, despite everything that tried to keep us apart. Do you ever regret it? Meeting me, I mean. Everything that came after. Not for a single moment. You taught me that there is more to life than power and control. You taught me that it is possible to be vulnerable with someone and not be destroyed by it. That is a gift I will never be able to repay." Helena turned and looked at him, this man who had started as her target and become her entire world. "You do not have to repay it. Just love me. That is enough." "I will love you until my last breath," he said. "And if there is anything after that, I will love you then too." They sat together under the stars, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances, and Elena understood that this was what redemption felt like, not the erasure of the past, but the transformation of it into something beautiful. If this moment is touching your heart, take a second to leave a comment. Write, "Love always finds a way." Let us see how many believers we have in this community. 6 months after the wedding, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, noticing changes in her body that she could not explain away. But she had been afraid to confirm it, afraid to hope for something so enormous. Finally, she took a test, and then another, and then a third, just to be sure. All 3 were positive. She told Dominic that evening, her hands trembling as she handed him the test strip. He stared at it for a long moment, his expression unreadable, and Elena felt her heart begin to sink. "Say something," she whispered. He looked up at her, and she saw that his eyes were glistening with tears he was trying very hard to hold back. "A baby," he said. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes." "Are you... Is this okay?" Instead of answering, he pulled her into his arms and held her so tight she could barely breathe. She felt his shoulders shaking and realized that he was crying, the powerful Dominic Moretti weeping like a child in her arms. "I never thought I would have this," he said, his voice rough. "I thought this part of life was not for men like me. I thought I had chosen a path that would never lead to family. And now? Now everything has changed. You have changed everything, Elena. You have given me a reason to be better than I ever thought I could be." The months that followed were a whirlwind of preparation and anticipation. They converted one of the spare bedrooms into a nursery, painting the walls a soft yellow and filling it with furniture that cost more than Elena's entire childhood home. Dominic attended every doctor's appointment, holding Elena's hand during the ultrasounds, watching the screen with an expression of wonder that made her fall in love with him all over again. He also accelerated his transition away from the darker aspects of his business. He said it was because he wanted their child to grow up in a different world than the one he had known, a world where their father's name was not whispered in fear. Elena knew that the change was genuine because she could see it in everything he did, the way he carried himself differently, the way he spoke about the future. One evening, about 2 months before her due date, Eleanor was resting in the nursery when Dominic came in and sat beside her on the rocking chair they had bought together. "I have something to tell you," he said. Eleanor felt a flutter of anxiety. "What is it?" "I have made a decision about the business, a final decision." He took her hand and held it in both of his. "By the time our child is born, I will have completed the transition to legitimate operations. No more grey areas, no more compromises. Everything above board, everything legal." "Dominic, that is a huge step, are you sure?" "I have never been more sure of anything. I want our child to grow up proud of who their father is. I want to look them in the eye and tell them that I built something honest for our family." Eleanor felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. "You are already someone to be proud of. You know that, right?" "I am trying to believe it. With your help, I am getting closer every day." She leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him beside her. Outside the window, the city lights twinkled like earthbound stars, and Elena thought about how far they had come from that rainy night when everything had fallen apart. The baby came. 3 weeks early, in the middle of a spring thunderstorm that rattled the windows of the hospital. Elena labored for 14 hours while Dominic paced the hallway outside, forbidden from entering by the medical team until the final stage. When they finally let him in, he rushed to her side and took her hand, his face pale with worry. "I am here," he said. "I am right here." "I know," she gasped. "I know you are." The next few hours were a blur of pain and pressure and the encouraging voices of nurses and doctors. And then, just as the storm outside reached its crescendo, Elena heard a sound that made everything else fade away. A baby's cry. They placed the infant on her chest, and Elena looked down at the tiny, squirming bundle that had just entered the world. A girl, they said, with dark hair like her father, and eyes that would eventually settle into the color of autumn leaves like her mother's. "She is perfect," Elena whispered. Dominic leaned over them both, his eyes fixed on his daughter's face. He looked terrified and amazed and completely transformed, like a man seeing the sun for the first time. "What should we call her?" he asked. Eleanor had thought about this for months, considering dozens of names and discarding them all. But now, looking at her daughter's face, she knew exactly what to say. "Isabella, after my grandmother." "Isabella Moretti?" Dominic tried the name out, rolling it around on his tongue. "It is perfect. She is perfect. You are perfect." He kissed Eleanor's forehead, then leaned down and pressed the gentlest possible kiss to Isabella's tiny nose. "I promise you," he whispered to his daughter, "that I will spend the rest of my life keeping you safe. You will never know fear. You will never know want. You will never know anything but love. This is my vow to you, Isabella. This is my promise." The storm outside had begun to fade, leaving behind a quiet that felt like absolution. Eleanor lay in the hospital bed with her daughter in her arms and her husband beside her, and she understood that this was the moment everything had been leading to. Not the mission, not the deception, not the discovery that had almost destroyed everything. This moment of pure, uncomplicated love, arrived at through the most complicated path imaginable. Isabella opened her eyes and looked up at her parents, and Elena could have sworn she saw something like recognition in that tiny face, as if the baby already knew that she had been born into a family that would move heaven and earth to protect her. "Welcome to the world, little one," Elena whispered. "We have been waiting for you." The years that followed were the happiest of Elena's life. Isabella grew from a tiny, helpless infant into a curious, intelligent toddler, and then into a bright-spirited child who inherited her father's determination and her mother's warmth. She filled their home with laughter and questions and the kind of chaos that only a child can bring, and Elena cherished every moment of it. Dominic proved true to his word. By Isabella's first birthday, his transition to legitimate business was complete. He invested in real estate, in technology startups, in a restaurant chain that bore no connection to his former life. He became known not as a crime boss but as a businessman, a philanthropist, a devoted husband and father. Some people still whispered about his past, of course. Reputations are not so easily shed. But Dominic faced the whispers with his head held high, knowing that his daughter would never have to be ashamed of who he had become. Eleanor's mother moved to Chicago to be closer to her granddaughter, and she became a fixture in their lives. She babysat when Elena and Dominic needed a night out, told Isabella stories about her great-grandmother, taught her how to make the recipes that had been passed down through generations of their family. For the first time, Eleanor felt like she had roots. Not the tangled, painful roots of her past, but new, ones strong and healthy, growing in soil that she had cultivated with her own hands. On Isabella's 5th birthday, they threw a party at the penthouse, filling it with balloons and streamers and more presents than any child could possibly need. Isabella ran from room to room, shrieking with delight, her dark hair flying behind her like a flag. Dominic caught Elena's eye from across the room and smiled, and she felt her heart swell with a love that still surprised her with its intensity. Later, that night, after the guests had gone and Isabella had finally fallen asleep clutching a new teddy bear, Eleanor and Dominic sat together on the terrace, watching the city lights below. "Can you believe it has been 5 years?" Eleanor asked. "In some ways it feels like yesterday. In others it feels like a lifetime." "A good lifetime." Dominic reached over and took her hand. "The best lifetime. Better than anything I could have imagined when I was young and foolish and thought that power was all that mattered. You were never foolish. Misguided, maybe, but never foolish." "Misguided is a kind word for it." He turned to look at her, his dark eyes soft in the candlelight. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been? If you had completed your mission, if Morrison had won?" Elena considered the question. It was one she had asked herself many times over the years, usually in quiet moments like this one. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But then, I look at our daughter, at you, at the life we have built, and I cannot imagine any other path leading here. I think everything happened exactly as it was supposed to. Even the pain? Even the pain. It made us who we are. It made this possible." Dominic lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it. "I love you, Elena Moretti, more today than yesterday, and less than tomorrow." That is very poetic for a former crime boss. "I have hidden depths." She laughed and leaned against his shoulder, feeling the familiar comfort of his presence. They sat together in companionable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one above the city. Elena thought about the journey that had brought them here, the lies and the truth, the fear and the courage, the betrayal and the forgiveness. It had not been an easy path, but it had been their path, and she would not change a single step of it. Because every step had led to this moment, to this terrace, this city, this man, this life, to home. A few weeks later, Elena received a letter. It came in an unmarked envelope with no return address, but she recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from Agent Morrison. Her hands trembled as she opened it, old fears resurfacing despite everything that had changed. But as she read, she realized that it was not a threat or a summons or any of the things she had dreaded. It was an apology. Morrison wrote that he had retired from the FBI 6 months earlier, after 23 years of service. He wrote that he had spent a lot of time thinking about the cases he had worked, the people he had used, the lines he had crossed in the name of justice. He wrote that Elena had been one of the people he regretted most. "I told you that we were on the same side," he wrote, "but I never stopped to ask what side you wanted to be on. I used your grief as a weapon and called it righteousness. I am sorry for that. I hope you have found the peace that I could not give you." Elena read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and put it away in a drawer. She did not feel anger toward Morrison anymore, or even resentment. She felt something closer to gratitude, because in a strange way, he had been the catalyst for everything that followed. If he had not recruited her, she would never have walked into that charity gala. She would never have met Dominic. She would never have become the person she was today. Sometimes the worst decisions lead to the best outcomes. Sometimes the darkest paths lead to the brightest light. That evening she told Dominic about the letter. He listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful. "How do you feel about it?" he asked when she finished. "I feel released, like the last thread connecting me to that old life has finally been cut." "And that is a good thing?" "Yes, I think it is." She reached out and touched his face, tracing the familiar lines of his jaw. "I do not need to hold on to the past anymore. I have everything I need right here." Dominic pulled her close and held her, and they stood together in the middle of their home, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built. "Then let it go," he whispered. "Let all of it go. We are moving forward now, you and me and Isabella. That is all that matters." Elena closed her eyes and breathed in the scent of him, cedar and coffee, and something uniquely his. She felt the weight of the past lifting from her shoulders, floating away like a balloon released into the sky. She was finally free. 10 years. After Elena had walked into Dominic Moretti's life with a mission and walked out with his heart, their story had settled into a rhythm of quiet contentment. Isabella was 15 now, a teenager with her father's determination and her mother's compassion. She had grown into a young woman who asked difficult questions and refused to accept easy answers, who challenged her parents and made them better people in the process. Dominic's business empire had flourished in its legitimate form. He was respected in the Chicago business community, known for his sharp mind and his generous philanthropy. He sat on the boards of 3 different charities, funded scholarships for underprivileged students, and quietly helped dozens of families who reminded him of the one he might have had if circumstances had been different. Elena had found her own calling as well. She had gone back to school, earned a degree in social work, and now ran a non-profit organization that helped women escape difficult situations and rebuild their lives. The irony of her work was not lost on her. She had started her journey by deceiving a powerful man, and now she spent her days helping women find the strength to be honest about who they were and what they needed. On a cool autumn evening, the family gathered for dinner at the penthouse. Eleanor had prepared her grandmother's recipes, the ones she had taught Isabella, and the apartment was filled with the aroma of tomatoes and basil and fresh bread. They sat around the table together, Elena and Dominic and Isabella and Elena's mother, who at 73 was still sharp and quick with a joke. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and the occasional loving argument about whose turn it was to do dishes. After dinner, Dominic asked Isabella to join him on the terrace. Eleanor watched them go, these 2 people she loved more than life itself, and felt her heart overflow with gratitude. Through the glass doors, she could see them talking, their heads bent close together. She did not know what they were discussing, but she could guess. Isabella had been asking questions lately about her father's past, about the rumors she had heard at school, about the life he had led before she was born. Dominic had promised to tell her the truth when she was old enough to understand. Elena suspected that tonight was the night. She joined them on the terrace as the conversation was winding down. Isabella's face was thoughtful, her dark eyes filled with the complexity of processing difficult truths. "Mom," she said, looking up, "did you know about all of this, about what Dad used to do?" Eleanor sat down beside her daughter and took her hand. I knew. I knew before we were married, before we even fell in love. In fact, I came into your father's life specifically because of who he was." "What do you mean?" Eleanor looked at Dominic, who nodded. They had decided long ago that when this moment came, they would tell their daughter everything. And so Elena told her the whole story from the beginning, the FBI, the mission, the deception, the discovery, the confrontation, the choice to start over. She told her about Agent Morrison, about her own father, about the tangled web of lies and truth that had somehow led to love. Isabella listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each revelation. When Elena finished, the terrace was silent except for the distant sounds of the city below. "So your whole relationship started as a lie," Isabella said finally. "Yes. And you stayed anyway, both of you." "Yes," Dominic said, "because we realized that what we had become was more important than how we began. We could not change the past, but we could choose the future." Isabella was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked at her parents with an expression that was surprisingly mature for her 15 years. "I think that is the most romantic thing I have ever heard." Eleanor laughed, surprised. "You do?" "Yes. You did not have a perfect beginning. You made mistakes, both of you. But you chose to forgive each other and build something real. That is harder than falling in love with someone perfect. That is actually loving someone." Dominic reached over and squeezed his daughter's shoulder. "When did you become so wise?" "I learned from you." The three of them sat together on the terrace as the sun set over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Eleanor looked at her husband and her daughter and thought about all the roads she had traveled to arrive at this moment. She thought about the scared young woman who had agreed to a dangerous mission because she wanted justice for her father. She thought about the wife who had lived a double life, torn between duty and desire. She thought about the mother who had discovered that love was stronger than any secret, stronger than any fear. All of those women were part of her. All of their choices had led her here, and here was exactly where she wanted to be. Later that night, after Isabella had gone to bed and the house was quiet, Elena and Dominic stood together at the window of their bedroom, looking out at the city they called home. "Do you think she understood?" Elena asked. "I think she understood more than we gave her credit for. She is our daughter, after all." "She is. The best parts of both of us." Dominic wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her close against his chest. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night after everything fell apart? You said you fell in love with me." "I remember. It was the truest thing I had ever said." "And now, 10 years later, do you still feel the same?" Eleanor turned in his arms and looked up at his face. The years had added lines around his eyes and silver to his temples, but he was still the same man who had changed her life with a single decision to trust her. "I feel more," she said. "Every day I feel more. I did not know it was possible to love someone this much. Neither did I." He leaned down and kissed her, soft and slow, with all the tenderness of a man who had learned that vulnerability was not weakness, but strength. When they finally pulled apart, Elena rested her head against his chest and listened to the steady rhythm of his heart. "We made it," she whispered. "Against all odds, we made it." "We did. And this is just the beginning. Promise?" "Promise. Forever and always, Elena. That is the only vow I have never broken, and I never will." She closed her eyes and let herself sink into his embrace, feeling the warmth of his body and the certainty of his love. Outside, the city sparkled with a million lights, each one representing a story, a life, a possibility. But the only story that mattered to Elena was the one she was living right now. The story of a woman who had started with lies and ended with truth. The story of a love that had survived betrayal and emerged stronger than before. The story of a family built from the ashes of deception, held together by forgiveness and hope. It was not a perfect story. It was messy and complicated and full of moments she would rather forget. But it was hers, and it was real, and she would not trade it for anything in the world. Married to the Mafia Boss, she had hidden secrets under her pillow, until one fell and revealed who she was. And in that revelation, she had found something she never expected. She had found home. If you have watched this far, it is because you liked this story. Leave a comment saying, "I have watched this far so I can get to know you and see who really enjoys the stories here on the channel." Your support means everything to us. If this story touched your heart, if it made you feel something real, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story. Give this video a like to help it reach more people who need a reminder that love can conquer anything. And please, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Share it with a friend, a family member, anyone who might be going through a difficult time. Because we all need to be reminded that second chances exist, that forgiveness is possible, that even the darkest beginnings can lead to the brightest endings. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of this community. Until next time, remember, no matter what secrets you carry, no matter what mistakes you have made, you are worthy of love. You are worthy of redemption. You are worthy of your own happy ending. This is not goodbye. This is just the end of one story and the beginning of another. See you in the next video.